My Uncle Dave is the kind of person who loves pulling pranks, often in the goofiest ways. Once, he convinced me that a hot pepper was a pickle, leading to an unforgettable scene at Chili's, where I ended up washing my mouth out with soap in the restroom. Uncle Dave lived in Connecticut, so we didn't see much of him after my family moved south. One weekend, after a series of creepy encounters in our neighborhood, we learned Uncle Dave was coming to visit and staying in our guest room. I was so excited that my mom let me stay up late to wait for him. But after dozing off on the couch repeatedly, she sent me to bed, promising I'd see him in the morning. That night, I woke suddenly with an eerie feeling. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had goosebumps all over. I felt someone watching me. Frozen, I scanned the room. My nightlight cast enough glow to make out my Beanie Baby collection, my desk, my dresser, and a man crouched beside it. He had dark hair, his back against the wall, knees pulled to his chest. His teeth and the whites of his eyes gleamed as he stared directly at me. At first, I was terrified, but then I thought, this must be Uncle Dave. He's pranking me again. Determined not to give him the satisfaction of scaring me, I stayed silent. But as time passed, dread filled me. Uncle Dave loved pranks, but this, sitting completely still for hours just to scare me, it didn't seem like him. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep. When morning came, I rushed to find Uncle Dave, laughing and ready to call him out for his prank. But my mom looked at me, confused, and told me Uncle Dave's flight had been delayed. He hadn't arrived yet. I was horrified. Who had been in my room? My mom brushed it off as a dream. A few nights later, I woke up with that same unsettling feeling. This time, I didn't see anyone by the dresser. Relieved, I tried to go back to sleep. As I lay there, a slender hand crept up from the side of my bed, feeling around the comforter. I was paralyzed. Every instinct screamed for me to shout or run, but my body wouldn't respond. The hand lingered for what felt like an eternity before vanishing. When I finally found my voice and called for my mom, my nightlight flickered off, plunging the room into darkness. The next thing I remember is waking up. Terrified, I leapt from my bed, avoiding the floor, and ran straight to my mom. My dad checked under my bed, but found nothing. They insisted it was all in my imagination, but I knew the truth. Someone, or something, had been in my room. Not once, but twice. One night, my good friend and I were hanging out at our favorite bar in my neighborhood, enjoying a few beers. Since it was a weeknight and we both had work and school in the morning, we decided to call it an early night and left around midnight. My friend offered to walk me home, but I declined. He didn't have his car that night and would have to walk 20 to 30 minutes in the cold to get back to his place. I felt bad making him go out of his way, especially since my apartment was nearby. After a quick hug goodbye, I started the short walk home alone. It was dark and quiet, with no one around at first. A few minutes into my walk, I noticed someone walking far behind me. It didn't seem strange. I've always been pretty comfortable walking alone at night, and I don't scare easily. So I just kept going. But then I glanced back again and noticed something odd. The person who had been far behind me was now much closer. Closer than they should have been if they were walking at the same pace. I was walking quickly because it was cold, and I wanted to get home. So how had they closed the distance so fast? I tried to brush off my unease, but I couldn't shake the bad feeling creeping over me. My instincts screamed that something wasn't right. I pulled out my phone, opened my recent calls, and kept walking, clutching it tightly in my hand. Within moments, I could hear the person's footsteps, sharp and distinct, right behind me. My heart raced, but I reminded myself that I was almost home. I just had to make it across the parking lot in front of my building. As I reached the parking lot, I turned around one last time. That's when I saw him clearly, an older man carrying several bags. We locked eyes, and in an instant, he started running toward me. Most people would probably have started running, but for some reason, my instinct was to act like I hadn't noticed. I calmly picked up my phone, called my mom, and started talking. "Hey, Mom, I'm in front of the building, but I forgot my keys. Can you unlock the door and wait for me?" My voice was steady, but my heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. While I was on the phone, I noticed 3 guys sitting on a bench in front of my building. It wasn't unusual. People often hung out there even late at night. I don't know if it was the phone call, the presence of those guys, or both, but the man abruptly changed course. He ran past me and into the closest building without a word. I stood frozen for a moment, realizing the danger had passed. My mom, who was still on the phone, scolded me for forgetting my keys and waking her up. But as soon as I told her what had happened, she freaked out and came running outside in her pajamas. To this day, I don't know what that man's intentions were. All I know is that they weren't good. And I'm grateful I never had to find out. My dog and I love hiking. She's a blue heeler mix I found in 2019, and we've been inseparable ever since. At the time, we were living in Florence, Alabama, and decided to explore the TVA Nature Trails, a network of 30 trails spanning over 180 miles alongside the river. I was familiar with the area, so I knew most of the routes and where they intersected. It was late fall or early spring, a crisp Sunday afternoon. When we arrived at the parking lot, I felt an odd urge to back my car into the space, which I never do. At the time, I didn't think much of it. As I laced up my boots and got my gear ready, I noticed a man nearby. He looked wildly out of place, late 40s or early 50s, wearing jeans, a brown blazer, and leather dress shoes. If it were a different setting, I might have thought he was heading to an interview. But this was the middle of the woods, on a Sunday. My gut told me something wasn't right. He started down one of the trails, and I decided to take a route that wouldn't intersect with his. Here's where things got eerie. Picture this: the river to my left, my dog splashing happily in the water, and me standing on a quiet, tucked-away beach beneath a cliff. From this spot, no one could see us unless they were intentionally looking. Suddenly, a wave of dread hit me, a visceral, gut-wrenching feeling that screamed, "Get out of here now." Without hesitation, I leashed my dog and began heading back toward the trails. When I reached a fork in the path, I heard the man's voice shouting from the highest trail above me. My blood ran cold. He was on a path he shouldn't have been able to reach without doubling back. He yelled something I couldn't understand at first, so I asked him to repeat it. What he said next will haunt me forever. "I can see what the military was talking about when they said you can see everything from up high," he called, gesturing toward the secluded area where my dog and I had been playing. That was all I needed to hear. I started walking back toward the bridge over a steep ditch, hoping to put as much distance between us as possible. But then he started running down the hill toward me, calling out questions about my dog. My heart pounded as I tried to stay calm. My dog, sensing my unease, was doing her best to protect me but was confused by the situation. Then he said, "I was watching you in the parking lot. I saw you get out of your car. Chills shot down my spine. He caught up to us on the bridge and asked to pet my dog. I firmly said no. He asked if I had a husband, and I lied, saying yes. He was in the army and would be furious if this man didn't leave me alone. The man kept pace with us, staying uncomfortably close. He had gloves in his blazer pocket and a small plastic bottle in his hand filled with a dark liquid that looked like sweet tea. But something about it felt off. Then he said, "I'm going to pet your dog," and reached down. My dog, not big but fiercely protective, jumped on him with enough force to knock the bottle from his hand. It tumbled into the steep ditch below. To my shock, the man scrambled down after it, sliding down the bank at an angle that looked dangerous. Seizing the moment, my dog and I bolted. I avoided the main trails, weaving through the woods for 2 miles until we reached a more populated area closer to the parking lot. There, I found a kind stranger and asked him to walk me to my car. He obliged, joking around to ease my nerves. I was endlessly grateful for his help. When we got home, I was furious that this man had ruined one of our favorite hiking spots. But more than that, I was shaken. I tried to tell myself he was just socially awkward, overly interested in my dog. Deep down, though, I knew better. And I still can't stop wondering, what was in that bottle? And why was it so important that he risked injury to retrieve it? When I was 10 years old in the late 90s, I was a chubby kid who endured endless teasing. One particularly brutal nickname, Free Willy, stuck after the movie came out, haunting me for a year or so. Unsurprisingly, I didn't have many friends and spent most of my time playing console and computer games instead of joining in on sports. But there was one exception. Steve, an older kid from a few blocks away. Steve was a nerd, cool as hell, and introduced me to amazing games like Diablo, Dungeon Keeper, and StarCraft. One Saturday, I asked if he wanted to hang out, but his parents had travel plans. Instead, he offered to lend me his copy of StarCraft. Ecstatic, I rushed to Steve's house to pick it up and was practically skipping home with excitement, until I heard someone call out to me, "Hey, kid!" I froze and turned. Across the street was a pizza delivery car with its hood popped open. The man standing beside it looked like he was in his 30s, wearing a uniform. "Can I get a hand?" he asked, gesturing toward his car. I hesitated. I wasn't mechanically inclined and had no idea how I could possibly help. What's wrong?" I called back. "Just need your help real quick," he replied without answering my question. Something about his tone and the situation sent a shiver down my spine. "Sorry," I stammered. "I gotta get home." The man watched me silently as I turned and walked away. My heart pounded, and I felt the hairs on my neck stand on end. I glanced back to make sure he wasn't following me. He wasn't, but his gaze lingered on me like he was weighing his options. I made it home safely and didn't tell anyone about the encounter until years later. When I finally told my mom, her face went pale. She told me about a report from another parent in the neighborhood. A man driving a pizza car had been seen talking to their son under suspicious circumstances. When confronted, he claimed he was having car trouble, but his car started up without issue, and he sped away. To this day, I shudder to think what might have happened if I'd crossed the street to help